My name is Mitchell Jackson, and I did my presentation with Amber Kim and Emily Ferreira, and we did our case study over anxiety in Batman Begins. Bruce Wayne is the main character in Batman Begins. He's the son of Martha and Thomas Wayne, who are very wealthy and influential people in the corrupt city of Gotham. His parents were murdered during his early childhood, and his family butler, Alfred, raised Bruce for the rest of his childhood. The setting of his disorder is in the bottom of a well in his backyard, or more so, the origin of his disorder. The culture and environment that surrounds Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins gives us multiple instances to help us understand his fear and diagnosis, such as the main villain in Batman Begins, a scarecrow, uses a fear toxin to make people see their worst nightmare when they inhale the chemical. The diagnosis that we are giving Bruce is that he has anxiety, and this is a mental health condition where an individual will have persistent, intense, and excessive worry or fear about everyday situations. His specific diagnosis is that he has a specific fear, which is an ongoing fear of a specific stimuli, and in Bruce's case, it's bats. Whenever he fell down the well as a kid, there was a cave nearby, and bats flooded out of the cave and into the well, and it frightened Bruce. It's also due to Bruce's childhood being filled with anxiousness and fear and the murder of his parents. In the cultural context of Gotham, his anxiety disorder would not be taken seriously. This is because, compared to others in the corrupt city of Gotham, Bruce is very well off. If he were to go see a therapist in Gotham, they would most likely just diagnose him with an irrational fear. It is possible that anxiety may not be diagnosed in other cultures because every culture seeks a different perspective on societal expectations, or social expectations. So anxiety in other cultures may just be a social norm, so it may be diagnosed in some cultures, and in other cultures it may be overdiagnosed. Some stigmas that are associated with anxiety in our culture are being unpredictable and weak. So the two symptoms that Bruce displayed the most were nervousness and feelings of danger, panic or dread, and difficulty focusing or thinking clearly about anything other than bats. So for the latter symptom, the best example is whenever Bruce was at the play with his parents, there were bats in the play, or there were people dressed up as bats in the play, and Bruce had difficulty focusing on anything else. And he had flashbacks to whenever he fell down the well, and it got so bad that he couldn't focus on the play, and he just asked his parents to leave. For the first example, Ra's al Ghul is a leader of the League of Assassins, and Bruce was recruited by him to become an assassin, and to do so you have to go through training. In the final stage of Bruce's training, he took the fear toxin that the main villain used, and he had to face his fear. And essentially what he did is he opened up a box, and his worst fear popped out, which was bats. And so whenever bats swarmed him during his training, he was visibly distraught, and you could see that he was not thinking clearly. So one symptom that Bruce did not display a lot during the movie was avoidance of bats. Once he becomes Batman, he embraces bats, actually, and isn't scared of them. So as you can see in the picture to the right, the presence of bats around Bruce really did not affect him at all. So the best treatment for Bruce would be to work with a therapist to change his response to fear and to use exposure therapy. Slowly start to introduce bats to Bruce and monitor symptoms that he might show. As he becomes more comfortable with the idea of bats, add more rigor onto his treatment until he can handle real-life scenarios. Exposure therapy is appropriate for anxiety because in the film we see Bruce's exposure to bats in a non-traditional way helps him overcome his fear, which is the final training stage with Ra's al Ghul in the box. Concerns for exposure therapy include PTSD, setting boundaries with the client and therapist, and client safety. Because Bruce often experienced flashbacks to certain scenes where bats scared him, this would need to be controlled so his mental safety is not put at worse risk, so all of his flashbacks to the well and the play and stuff like that. And since Bruce comes from a wealthy, well-known family, he may be judged for going to therapy. He also may see a therapist who does not have good intentions for Bruce, such as Dr. Crane, who is not only a doctor, but also played the Scarecrow, or the villain. So for broader perspectives, the way anxiety is portrayed in Batman Begins is an accurate representation of the disorder. We talked about many of the scenarios where his anxiety is noticeable, like whenever he fell down the well, at the play, and his Ra's al Ghul training, as well as whenever he ingests the fear toxin. And the portrayal of disorders in films in general gives us more knowledge about disorders than we may have once had. It broadcasts the effects of the highlighted disorders, showing the symptoms and how it might affect one's actions. The widespread broadcasting helps society have a better understanding of these disorders, which in turn helps society with mental health awareness.